The birch splints were already stripped and ready in Tobias Jensen's hands when he knelt beside the orc girl in the forest clearing. Her leg twisted at an angle that made his stomach clench with sympathetic pain. She watched him approach with dark eyes that showed more wariness than fear, her green skin pale with shock, her small tusks catching the late afternoon light as she clenched her jaw against what had to be excruciating agony. He had been checking his trap lines when he heard the crack of breaking wood and the heavy thud of a body hitting earth. And now here she was, fallen from what looked like a rotted oak branch 20 feet above. Her gathering basket spilled across the forest floor with wild mushrooms and herbs scattered like abandoned treasures. "I need to set this before the swelling gets worse," Tobias said quietly, meeting her gaze with steady calm. "It's going to hurt." She nodded once, a sharp jerk of her chin, and he saw her fingers dig into the soft earth beneath her. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, with long black hair braided back from her face and wearing the rough spun tunic and leggings common to the orc settlements north of the Greywood. Her breathing came fast and shallow, but she made no sound, just watched him with an intensity that felt like being weighed and measured. Tobias had been a field surgeon's assistant during the border wars, back before he decided he had seen enough of blood and death to last several lifetimes. His hands remembered what to do even if his heart had grown weary of the doing. He ran his fingers along her shin with careful gentleness, feeling for the break, and she flinched but still made no sound. "Compound fracture," he said, more to himself than to her. "Clean break, though. You are lucky it did not tear through the skin." He looked at her again, this weathered woodsman of 32 years who had chosen solitude over the constant reminder of what humans did to orcs and orcs did to humans in the name of old hatreds. "I am going to straighten it now. You can scream if you need to." "I will not scream," she said, and her voice was surprisingly soft, with only the barest hint of the guttural accent he associated with orc speech. "Do what you must." He positioned the birch splints on either side of her leg, then wrapped his hands around her calf just below the break. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, he pulled on 2 the way his old mentor had taught him, because people always tensed on 3. The bone shifted back into alignment with a sensation he felt more than heard, and the orc girl's hand shot out and gripped his wrist with crushing strength. Her whole body went rigid, back arching off the ground, and he saw the cords of her neck stand out like iron cables beneath her skin. But she did not scream. Not even a whimper escaped her pressed-together lips. When the worst of it passed, and he began wrapping the splints with strips of cloth from his pack, her grip on his wrist loosened but did not release entirely. Her chest heaved with deep breaths, and sweat beaded on her forehead, but those dark eyes stayed locked on his face with something that might have been respect, or might have been shock that he was helping her at all. "What is your name?" Tobias asked as he worked, keeping his voice conversational to distract her from the continuing pain. "Grasha," she said after a moment's hesitation. "Grasha of the Stonefist clan. I am Tobias Jensen. My cabin is about 2 miles west of here. Can you walk if I help you?" She tried to push herself up on her elbows, and the color drained from her face so completely that her green skin turned almost gray. Tobias put a hand on her shoulder, gently but firmly pressing her back down. "That was a foolish question," he said. "You are not walking anywhere on that leg for at least a month. I am going to have to carry you." "No." The word came out sharp and immediate. "Leave me. My people will find me when I do not return. Your people are 3 days north of here if the Stonefist territory is where I think it is. You will be dead of exposure or eaten by wolves long before anyone comes looking." He finished tying off the splints and sat back on his heels. "I have a cabin. It is warm and dry. I have food and medicine. I can help you heal." Why? The question hung between them, weighted with all the history of their two peoples, all the wars and raids and massacres that stretched back generations. Why would you help me? Tobias looked at her, this young orc woman who had not screamed even when he set her shattered bone, and thought about all the reasons he could give. Because he had been a healer once and still remembered his oaths. Because he had seen too much death and could not stomach adding to it. Because isolation in these woods had taught him that old hatreds were exhausting and he had no energy left for them. Because you are hurt, he said simply, and I can help. He saw her struggle with it, pride warring with pragmatism, suspicion fighting against the undeniable fact that she could not save herself. Finally, she gave another of those short, sharp nods. "If you betray me, I will kill you," she said matter-of-factly. "Even with this broken leg, I will find a way." Noted. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and laid it over her like a blanket. "I need to go back to my cabin and get a litter. It will take me about an hour. Try not to move that leg, and if you hear wolves shout, I will hear you and come back." "I am not afraid of wolves." "Good. Neither am I, but I would rather not have to fight them off while you are injured." He stood and looked down at her, this fierce creature who gripped the earth instead of his hand now, who watched him with eyes that expected betrayal even as she accepted his help. "I will be back soon. I promise." He was true to his word, returning as the sun touched the horizon with a makeshift litter cobbled together from pine branches and rope. Getting Grasha onto it without jostling her leg too much proved challenging, but she bit down on a leather strap. He offered and made no complaint beyond a few sharp, hissing breaths through her teeth. By the time he dragged the litter through his cabin door, full darkness had fallen, and his arms burned with exhaustion. The cabin was a single large room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping loft, and simple furniture Tobias had built himself over the 3 years since he had claimed this piece of wilderness as his own. He pulled the litter close to the fireplace and built up the fire until warm light filled the space, then finally allowed himself to really look at his unexpected guest. Grasha lay very still on the litter, her eyes tracking his every movement. Dried sweat and forest dirt streaked her face, and he could see the pain etched in lines around her mouth. She looked young and fierce and terribly vulnerable all at once, and something in his chest tightened with an emotion he could not quite name. "I need to clean the wound site and check my work," he said. "Then I will make you something to eat and you can sleep. I am not hungry. You are in shock and you have lost blood even if the break did not pierce the skin. You need to eat." He brought water and clean cloths and knelt beside her again. "I am going to cut away your legging around the break. I will try not to look at anything I should not." He thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch, almost a smile. "I am not a delicate human flower to faint at the sight of my own leg." "No," he agreed, carefully cutting the fabric away from her calf. "You are considerably tougher than that." He cleaned around the splints with gentle efficiency, checking for any signs that the bone had shifted or that swelling was cutting off circulation. His work held. The leg was properly set, the splints secure. By the time he finished, Grasha's eyes had grown heavy, and he could see her fighting to stay awake. "Sleep," he said. "I will be right here if you need anything." "Why?" she asked again, but this time the question sounded more curious than suspicious. "Because that is what you do when someone is hurt and in your care," Tobias said. He brought blankets and tucked them around her, careful not to disturb her leg. "Sleep, Grasha. You are safe here." He watched her eyes drift closed, watched the tension slowly leave her shoulders as exhaustion claimed her. Only when her breathing deepened into true sleep did he allow himself to slump into his chair by the fire, suddenly aware of how tired he was, how strange it felt to have another person in his cabin after years of solitude. Outside, the wind picked up and rattled the shutters. Inside, the fire crackled and hissed. Tobias looked at the orc woman sleeping on his floor and wondered what exactly he had gotten himself into. The first week passed in a haze of careful routine. Tobias learned that Grasha healed faster than humans, that her tolerance for pain was extraordinary, and that her pride was perhaps the most injured part of her. She hated being helpless, hated having to ask for assistance with the most basic tasks, hated the way her body betrayed her with weakness. On the third day, when he brought her breakfast, he found her trying to pull herself up using the edge of his table, her face contorted with effort and frustration. He crossed the room in 3 strides and caught her before she could fall. "What are you doing?" he demanded, easing her back down onto the pile of furs and blankets he had arranged into a makeshift bed. "I need to relieve myself, and I will not use that curse pot like an infant," she snapped, color high in her cheeks. "Your leg. I know what state my leg is in." She glared at him with such fierce dignity that he almost smiled. "I need to get up. I need to move. I am going mad lying here." He studied her for a moment, then made a decision. "All right, I will make you a crutch, but you do not put any weight on that leg, none at all. Understood?" Her expression shifted from anger to surprise to something like gratitude. "Understood." The crutch he fashioned from a sturdy branch and padded with cloth allowed her to hobble to the necessary outside, though he stayed close enough to catch her if she stumbled. He pretended not to see the relief on her face when she finally regained even that small measure of independence. They fell into a pattern. Mornings he would check her leg, change the bandages, make sure the swelling continued to go down. She would eat the porridge or eggs he prepared, though she complained that he used too little salt and not enough spice. Afternoons, she would sit propped against the wall while he went about his daily tasks, checking traps, chopping wood, tending his small garden. Evenings they would eat together in companionable near silence, the only sounds the crackle of fire and the occasional scrape of spoon against bowl. He learned she had been gathering herbs for her clan's healer when she fell, that she had 2 younger brothers and an older sister, that her father had died in a human raid 5 years ago, and her mother had never truly recovered from the loss. She learned that he had grown up in a border town, that he had seen the wars up close, that he had chosen this isolated life deliberately to escape the cycle of violence, that he had no family left, no ties to pull him back to human settlements, that he preferred the company of trees to people. "Present company excluded?" she asked one evening, a note of teasing in her voice that surprised them both. "Present company is tolerable," he said, and she threw a piece of bread at him. On the 10th day, he came back from checking his traps to find her standing on one leg at his stove, stirring something in his largest pot. She turned at the sound of the door, her expression defiant. "If I have to eat one more meal of your bland cooking, I am going to lose my mind," she announced. "I found your spice stores. They are pathetic, but I have made do." The cabin smelled of unfamiliar spices and herbs, rich and savory in a way his cooking never achieved. His stomach growled audibly, and Grasha's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Sit," she ordered, gesturing with the spoon. "This will be ready soon." "You should not be standing on that leg," he protested, but he sat. "I am not standing on it. I am balancing on my good leg like a ridiculous flamingo. There is a difference." She ladled stew into bowls with concentration. "You saved my life, Tobias Jensen. The least I can do is save you from your own terrible cooking." The stew was the best thing he had tasted in years, complex and flavorful with tender chunks of rabbit and root vegetables he had not even known he had. He said as much, and Grasha looked pleased despite her attempt to appear indifferent. "My mother taught me," she said quietly. She said a woman who could not cook was a woman who could not take care of her family. She taught you well. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Tobias found himself watching her more than his food. In the firelight, her green skin seemed to glow with warmth, and her small tusks caught the light when she tilted her head certain ways. She was not beautiful by human standards, but there was something striking about her, something that drew his eye again and again. He caught himself and looked away, disturbed by the direction of his thoughts. She was his patient, an orc, someone who would leave as soon as her leg healed enough to travel. He had no business thinking of her as anything other than temporary. "What are you thinking about?" Grasha asked, and he realized she had been watching him watch her. "Nothing important," he lied. "Just enjoying the food." She did not look convinced, but she let it drop. That night, he climbed to his sleeping loft while she settled into her nest of blankets by the fire, and he lay awake for a long time listening to her breathe, wondering when exactly his quiet, solitary life had become so complicated. The nightmares came on the 14th night. Tobias woke to the sound of Grasha crying out in her sleep, words in the orcish tongue he did not understand but whose anguish was unmistakable. He climbed down from the loft and found her tangled in blankets, her face twisted with distress, her hands clutching at nothing. "Grasha," he said softly, touching her shoulder. "Wake up. You are dreaming." She came awake with a gasp, her hand shooting up to grab his wrist with bruising force. For a moment her eyes were wild, unseeing, and he stayed very still until recognition filtered back into them. "Tobias," she whispered, releasing his wrist. "I am sorry." "No need to be sorry. Everyone has nightmares." He settled cross-legged beside her. "Do you want to talk about it?" She was quiet for so long he thought she would refuse. Then, haltingly, she began to speak. "I dream about the raid," she said. "The one where my father died. I was 14. We heard the war horns and my father told us to run, but I hid instead. I hid in a root cellar and I watched through the cracks as they killed him. 3 human soldiers. They laughed while they did it." Tobias felt something cold and sick settle in his stomach. "I am sorry. Are you?" She looked at him with eyes that held old pain and older anger. "You were a soldier. How do I know you were not one of them?" "You do not," he said honestly. "I fought in the border wars. I killed orcs. I cannot undo that or pretend it did not happen." He met her gaze steadily. "I can tell you that I never laughed while doing it, that every death weighed on me, that I saw orcs die and I saw humans die, and eventually I could not tell the difference between one grief and another. They all just became death, so I left, just like that. You just walked away, not easily. But yes, I decided I would rather live alone in the woods than continue feeding that machine of violence." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her shoulder. "I cannot give you back your father. I cannot undo what was done to you and your family. I can only tell you that not all humans are those soldiers. Just as I have learned that not all orcs are the raiders who burned my village when I was a boy." Grasha stared at him, and he saw her working through something, some internal struggle he could only guess at. Finally, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that felt immense. "I am tired of being angry," she whispered, "but I do not know how to stop." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But perhaps we can figure it out together." They sat like that for a long time, her forehead against his shoulder, his hand on her back, while the fire burned low and the night deepened around them. When she finally pulled away, there was something different in her eyes, something softer. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for understanding." "Any time," he said, and meant it. After that night, something shifted between them. The wariness that had colored their interactions faded, replaced by an ease that felt natural and right. Grasha smiled more readily, and her smiles transformed her face from striking to genuinely beautiful. Tobias found himself going out of his way to make her laugh, treasuring the sound of her mirth like a precious thing. She began teaching him words in the Orcish tongue, laughing at his pronunciation. He taught her to play cards, a battered deck he had brought from his old life. They discovered they were both fiercely competitive and spent entire evenings locked in increasingly absurd games, trading insults and laughter in equal measure. "You are cheating," Grasha accused one night, her eyes narrowed in mock suspicion. "I am not cheating. You are just losing." "Impossible. Orcs never lose at cards. Then this is a historic occasion and I should make note of it." He laid down his winning hand with a flourish, and she threw her cards at him. He caught them laughing, and when their eyes met across the table, the laughter faded into something else, something charged with awareness. Tobias felt his breath catch, felt the sudden wild urge to reach across the table and touch her face, trace the proud line of her jaw, see if her lips were as soft as they looked. Instead, he cleared his throat and gathered up the cards. "Another game." "I should rest," Grasha said, her voice slightly strained. "My leg is aching." It was an excuse and they both knew it, but he let her have it, let them both have the escape from whatever had just flickered between them. That night he lay in his loft and listened to her shift restlessly in her blankets below. And he knew she was as awake as he was, thinking thoughts that mirrored his own. 3 weeks after the injury, Grasha took her first steps without the crutch. Tobias hovered nearby, ready to catch her, but she made it across the cabin floor on her own power, her face flushed with triumph. "I did it," she said, breathless and grinning. "Tobias, I did it." "You did," he agreed, and he could not keep the pride from his voice. "Soon you will be running through the forest again." The reminder that she would eventually leave fell between them like a stone into still water. Grasha's smile faded and she looked away. "Yes," she said quietly. "Soon I will need to return to my clan. Do you want to?" The question escaped before he could think better of it. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the conflict written plainly on her face. "I do not know," she admitted. "They are my family, my people, but I have been happier here in these 3 weeks than I have been in years," she said in a rush. "I wake up and I do not feel the weight of old angers. I laugh without feeling guilty for it. I look at you and I do not see a human enemy. I just see Tobias. The man who set my leg and did not let me scream alone. The man who makes terrible porridge and tells worse jokes. The man who has become." She trailed off, but he knew what she had been about to say because he felt it too. This thing growing between them that neither had named but both recognized. "Grasha," he said, and his voice came out rough with emotion. "You should know that these weeks have been the best of my life too." "That is a sad statement about your life," she said, attempting levity, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Perhaps, or perhaps it is just the truth." He crossed to her, moving slowly, giving her every chance to step back. She did not. "You have brought light into this cabin that I did not even know was missing. You have made me remember what it is like to have someone to talk to share meals with, to just exist alongside. I do not want you to go." "Then ask me to stay," she whispered. The words hung between them, an invitation and a challenge. Tobias thought about what it would mean, an orc woman living with a human man in the woods. The isolation that already defined his life would become absolute. Her clan would consider her cast out. Humans would call him a traitor if they ever found out. The world would not understand or accept them. None of it mattered. "Stay," he said, and he reached up to cup her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Stay with me, Grasha. Make this cabin a home instead of just a place to hide. Teach me your language and I will teach you mine." Cook food that does not taste like sawdust, and I will bring in wood for the fire. Stay and let us build something new, something that belongs to neither orc nor human but just to us." A tear spilled down her cheek and dampened his thumb. "My clan will never forgive me," she said. "They will say I have betrayed my father's memory. I know, and I am sorry for that, but Grasha, you are not betraying anyone by choosing your own happiness. Your father would want you to live, not just exist in a state of perpetual anger and grief. You do not know what he would want. You are right. But I know what I want. I want you here. I want to hear you laugh. I want to argue about spices and lose at cards and listen to you sing those orcish songs you think I cannot hear when you are cooking. I want all of it, if you will give it to me." She closed her eyes, and more tears leaked from beneath her lids. When she opened them again, they shone with decision. "I will stay," she said. "Not because you asked, though that helps, but because I choose this. I choose you. I choose the life we could build together over the life of anger I would return to." He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her and feeling her arms come around him in return. She was strong and warm and solid against him, and something in his chest that had been tight for years finally loosened. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "Thank you for choosing me." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in front of the fire while outside the world continued its indifferent turning. And inside, they built something fragile and precious, and entirely their own. The first kiss came a week later, on a morning when early snow dusted the ground and turned the world outside into a wonderland of white. Grasha was kneading bread dough, her hands working with practiced efficiency, when Tobias came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "The bread will not rise properly if you distract me," she said, but there was laughter in her voice. "I am willing to risk it," he said, and he turned her in his arms. She looked up at him, flour dusting her cheek and her tusks catching the morning light, and he thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she rose to meet him instead. Her lips were soft and warm and tasted faintly of the honey she had been sneaking from the jar. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory, two people learning the shape of each other. Then Grasha made a small sound in the back of her throat and deepened the kiss, her floury hands coming up to grip his shirt, and gentle became something more urgent. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tobias rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I know. I could see it in the way you looked at me." She smiled, and there was mischief in her eyes. "I wanted you to do it. I was beginning to think I would have to kiss you first. You could have. I would not have complained." "I will keep that in mind for next time," she said, and kissed him again. The bread ended up slightly over-kneaded, but neither of them cared. Winter came in earnest after that, locking them into the cabin with walls of snow and ice. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Grasha told him stories of orc legends, of great warriors and wise shamans, of the gods who shaped the mountains with their hands. Tobias shared human folk tales, songs from his childhood, memories of a life that felt like it had belonged to someone else. They learned each other's bodies slowly, with reverence and care. Tobias discovered the scars on Grasha's back from a bear attack when she was 16, kissed each one and listened to the story. Grasha traced the old sword wound on his shoulder, the arrow scar on his thigh, and he told her about the battles that had left them. Each scar was a piece of history, a moment survived, a story that led them both to this cabin in the woods. The first time they made love, snow fell thick and heavy outside and the fire burned low. Grasha was nervous despite her usual confidence, and Tobias went slowly, carefully, learning what made her gasp and sigh. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed in the loft, her head on his chest and his fingers trailing through her long dark hair. "I never thought I could have this," Grasha said quietly. "I thought I was too angry, too broken from what happened to my father. I thought I would live my whole life wanting revenge instead of wanting something more." "You are not broken," Tobias said firmly. "You are strong. You survived something terrible and you came out the other side still capable of love. That is not weakness. That is the strongest thing a person can do." She lifted her head to look at him, and in the dimness he could just make out the shine of tears in her eyes. "I love you," she said. "I did not plan to. I did not even know I was capable of loving a human. But I do. I love you, Tobias Jensen." His heart felt too large for his chest, swollen with an emotion so powerful it bordered on pain. "I love you too," he said, and he pulled her down to kiss her, tasting salt from her tears and the unique flavor that was purely her. "I love you, Grasha of the Stonefist clan, my fierce, beautiful, terrible cook of an orc woman." She laughed against his mouth. "My cooking is excellent and you know it." "It is," he agreed. "Everything about you is excellent, flatterer." "Truth-teller," he corrected, and he kissed her again. Spring came slowly that year, the snow melting in fits and starts, the world emerging from winter's grip, one reluctant day at a time. Grasha's leg had healed completely, leaving only the faintest scar where the bone had broken. She could run and climb and move with all her former grace, and Tobias caught himself simply watching her sometimes, marveling that she was here, that she had chosen to stay. They expanded the garden, planting vegetables and herbs that Grasha remembered from her childhood. She taught him the orcish names for each plant, and he taught her the human ones, and they made up their own names too, private jokes that belonged to no language but theirs. "What do you call this one in common?" Grasha asked one afternoon, holding up a fistful of dark green leaves. "Nightshade," Tobias said. "Very poisonous, do not eat it." "We call it Death's Kiss," Grasha said, "which I think is a much better name, more poetic." "Poetic is one word for it, terrifying is another." She threw the leaves at him, and he chased her around the garden until they both collapsed laughing in the dirt, heedless of the plants they were crushing. The first real test of their life together came in late spring, when Tobias went to the nearest human settlement to trade furs for supplies they could not make themselves. He had done this trip twice a year for as long as he had lived in the woods, but this time he had a secret to keep, a whole life hidden away in his cabin that the humans could never know about. He traded his furs efficiently, purchased salt and sugar and lamp oil, and was preparing to leave when he heard a familiar name spoken at the next stall over. "Stonefist clan has been quiet this year," a grizzled trader was saying. "Usually they raid our northern farms every spring like clockwork. But nothing this year, not so much as a stolen chicken." "Maybe they have finally learned their lesson," another man said. "After we burned their harvest stores last fall, they probably do not have the strength to raid." Tobias felt anger flare hot and immediate in his chest. The harvest stores. He remembered Grasha mentioning that her clan had lost their winter reserves to a fire, but she had not said it was deliberately set by humans. He thought of her people starving through the winter, thought of children going hungry, and his hands clenched into fists. "Or maybe they are planning something bigger," the first trader said darkly. "I heard they are looking for one of their own who went missing. A young female. Some think she ran off with supplies to human territory. If that is true and they find proof, there will be war for certain." Tobias made himself breathe slowly, forced his face into neutral lines. He finished his business quickly and started the long walk back to his cabin, his mind churning with worry. He found Grasha outside splitting wood, her movements efficient and powerful. She looked up when he approached and smiled, that smile that transformed her whole face, and he felt his anger drain away into something more complicated. "You are back early," she said, setting down the axe. "Did you get everything we needed?" "I did." He set down his pack and went to her, pulling her into his arms. "Grasha, I heard people talking in town about your clan. They said the Stonefist are looking for you." She stiffened against him. "I knew they would. I am surprised it took this long. They think you might have stolen from them. Some believe you have allied with humans. If your clan finds evidence to support that, they are talking about war." Grasha pulled back to look at him, her expression troubled. "My clan will not go to war over me. I am one person, not important enough to risk that." "Are you certain?" "No," she admitted. "But what else can we do? I am not going back, not now. Not after I have had this taste of peace and happiness. I cannot go back to that life of anger." "Then we make sure they never find you," Tobias said firmly. "We are careful. We stay away from both orc and human territories. We build our life here and we protect it." "It is not fair to you," Grasha said. "You should be able to trade in town without worrying about my safety. You should not have to lie about your life. Life is not fair. But I would rather have an unfair life with you than a fair life without you." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing across her cheeks. "We will make this work, together." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "Together," she echoed. They were more careful after that. Tobias made his supply runs less frequently and never stayed longer than necessary. Grasha stayed close to the cabin when he was gone, ready to hide if anyone approached. It was not perfect, but it was what they had, and they made it work through determination and love. Summer brought long, golden days that seemed to stretch endlessly. They swam in the cold creek that ran near the cabin, and Tobias learned that Grasha was a powerful swimmer, moving through the water with the same grace she brought to everything. They lay on the banks afterward, letting the sun dry them, and Tobias thought he had never been more content in his entire life. "Tell me something you have never told anyone else," Grasha said one afternoon, her head pillowed on his chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin. Tobias thought about it, sorting through memories and secrets. "When I was a boy," he said slowly, "before the war started, my best friend was an orc child. His name was Gruck. His family had settled near our village and were trying to live peacefully with humans. We played together every day. He taught me to track deer and I taught him to fish. We were inseparable." He paused, the memory both sweet and painful. Grasha stayed quiet, just listening. "When the wars began, a mob came for his family. I was 12. I watched them drag Gruck and his parents from their house. I watched them beat them, and I did nothing. I just hid and watched like a coward. That night, Gruck's family fled and I never saw him again." Tobias felt his throat tighten. "I think about him sometimes, wonder if he survived, if he hates all humans now because of what he saw that day. If he remembers the human boy who was supposed to be his friend but who did not help him." Grasha shifted to look at him, her eyes full of understanding. "You were 12 years old," she said. "A child. What could you have done against a mob?" "I could have tried. I could have stood with him. Instead, I hid. And if you had stood with him, you would have been beaten too, possibly killed. Would that have helped Gruck? Or would it have just resulted in another dead child?" She touched his face gently. "You carry too much guilt for things beyond your control, Tobias. You were a child in a terrible situation. You survived. That is not something to be ashamed of. I know. Logically, I know that. But there is a part of me that will always be that 12-year-old boy watching his friends suffer and doing nothing." "Then let me tell you something," Grasha said. "If Gruck survived, if he is out there somewhere, I think he would understand. I think he would forgive you, because that is what we do when we love someone. We forgive them for being human and fallible and capable of fear." She kissed him softly. "And I think he would be happy to know that you found an orc woman to love, that you did not let what happened turn you into someone full of hate. That in your own way, you honored that childhood friendship by refusing to become the enemy." Tobias felt something break loose inside him, some old knot of guilt and shame that he had carried for 20 years. He pulled Grasha close and held her tight, and when tears came, he let them fall without shame. She held him and stroked his hair and murmured words of comfort in her language, and he felt more seen and understood than he ever had in his life. When the tears passed, he kissed her with gratitude and love and need, and they made love there by the creek with the sun warm on their skin, and the sound of water over stones filling the air. Afterward, Grasha fell asleep in his arms, and Tobias watched clouds drift across the sky and thought about forgiveness and second chances, and the strange paths that led two people to each other. Autumn arrived in a blaze of color, the trees around the cabin transforming into fire. Grasha spent days gathering and preserving food for the coming winter, and Tobias helped her with a contentment he had never known. This was different from his solitary preparations of previous years. This time he was working with someone, building toward a shared future, and every jar of preserves and every cord of wood felt like a promise they were making to each other. "We will need more firewood than you usually gather," Grasha said one evening, surveying their stores. "Orcs run colder than humans. I will need the cabin much warmer this winter." "Then I will cut twice as much wood," Tobias said easily. "Whatever you need." She looked at him, something soft and wondering in her expression. "You would do that, twice the work just so I am comfortable." "Grasha, I would cut down the entire forest if that was what it took to keep you warm and happy." He said it lightly, but he meant every word. She crossed to him and kissed him, slow and deep, and when she pulled back her eyes were suspiciously bright. "I do not deserve you," she said. "That is where you are wrong. You deserve everything good in this world, and I plan to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you." "That is a large promise." "Then I had better get started," he said, and he kissed her again. The danger came on a cold morning in late autumn, when frost painted the world silver and their breath misted in the air. Tobias was inside preparing breakfast when Grasha, who had gone out to fetch water, came running back to the cabin with fear written on her face. "Hide," she said urgently. "Now, there are orcs in the woods, hunters from my clan." Tobias's heart kicked into high gear. "How many? 3. They have not seen me yet, but they are tracking something. Probably deer, but if they come closer, if they see the cabin, we tell them you have been staying with a hermit who helped you recover from an injury. The truth, more or less. They will never believe a human helped me without ulterior motive, and if they see how we look at each other." She shook her head. "You do not understand. If they realize we are together, they will kill you and drag me back to the clan in disgrace." "Then what do we do?" Grasha's face set in determined lines. "You hide. I will go out and meet them, say I have been living here alone since my injury. Send them away. I am not hiding while you face them alone. Tobias, please, they cannot find you here, they just cannot." Her voice broke slightly. "I cannot lose you, not to this." He wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside her and face whatever came together. But he saw the fear in her eyes, real and raw, and he understood that this was about more than just his safety. This was about protecting the life they had built, the secret that kept them both safe. "All right," he said. "I will hide. But if things go wrong, if you call out, I am coming out. I will not leave you to face them alone. If things go wrong, you run," Grasha said fiercely. "You run and you do not look back. Promise me." "Grasha, promise me." "I promise," he lied, because they both knew he would never run and leave her behind. He climbed to the loft and concealed himself behind stored supplies, in a corner where he could not be seen from below but where he could hear everything. He heard Grasha take a deep breath, heard her open the door and walk out to meet the hunters. The voices that drifted through the cabin walls were speaking in the Orcish tongue, too fast and idiomatic for Tobias to fully understand. But he caught enough. Grasha's name, questions about where she had been, why she had not returned. One voice in particular sounded angry, demanding answers with sharp authority. Then he heard Grasha's response, calm and measured, and though he could not understand all the words, he heard the strength in her voice. She was not cowering or apologizing. She was explaining, defending, holding her ground. The conversation went on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Tobias waited in an agony of suspense, every muscle tense, ready to burst from hiding if he heard sounds of violence. But Grasha's voice remained steady, and gradually the angry voice seemed to quiet. Finally, he heard footsteps moving away. Silence stretched. Then the door opened and closed, and Grasha called up to him, "They are gone." He scrambled down from the loft to find her leaning against the closed door, her face pale and her hands shaking. He pulled her into his arms and felt her sag against him. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "The truth, mostly. That I fell and broke my leg, that I have been here recovering. That I decided to stay in the woods alone rather than return to the clan." Her voice was muffled against his chest. "They were not happy. They said I am abandoning my family, my duty, that my mother grieves for me every day." Guilt flickered across her features, and Tobias tightened his arms around her. "I told them I needed time," Grasha continued, "that I was not ready to return. The leader, Throck, he is my mother's brother. He said I had 1 year. If I do not come home by next autumn, they will consider me cast out from the clan permanently, dead to them." "I am sorry," Tobias said, meaning it. "I know that is not easy to hear. It is not. But it is also a relief in a way. Now I have a choice with a clear deadline. Return to the clan and a life I do not want, or stay here and lose my family forever. That is not much of a choice." "No," she agreed, "but at least it is mine to make." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the aftermath of fear and near disaster. Outside, the world continued its slow turn toward winter. Inside, they clung to each other and the fragile peace they had built. That night, lying in bed with Grasha curled against him, Tobias made a decision. The next morning, he went out to a particular tree in the forest, one that stood taller than all the others, an ancient oak that had probably been standing for 300 years. At its base, he began to carve. He worked for days, whenever he could steal time away from his other tasks. The carving took shape slowly, carefully, a message written in both the Orcish script Grasha had taught him and in common letters. When it was finished, he brought Grasha to see it. "What is this?" she asked, staring at the carved words. "A promise," Tobias said. "Read it." She stepped closer, her fingers tracing the letters. In both languages, the message was the same. Here is where Tobias Jensen and Grasha of Stonefist made their life together. Here is where they chose love over hate, peace over war, each other over all the rest. Here is where they built a home. "Tobias," she breathed, and when she turned to him her eyes were full of tears. He dropped to one knee in the carpet of fallen leaves. From his pocket, he drew 2 rings he had carved from antler over long evenings by the fire, smoothed and polished until they gleamed. "I do not know the Orcish marriage customs," he said, "and I have rejected most of the human ones, but I know this. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to argue about spices and lose at cards and listen to you sing. I want to build a life that belongs to just us, free from the expectations of either of our peoples. Grasha of the Stonefist clan, will you marry me?" She sank to her knees in front of him, heedless of the damp ground, and cupped his face in both hands. "Yes," she said, and she was laughing and crying at once. "Yes, you ridiculous, wonderful man, I will marry you." He slipped one ring onto her finger, and she slipped the other onto his, and they kissed there in the shadow of the ancient oak, with their promises carved into its trunk. When they pulled apart, Grasha pressed her forehead to his, the gesture of trust and intimacy she had first shown him on that night she woke from nightmares. "In Orc culture," she said softly, "marriage is sealed with a vow before the gods and before witnesses. We have no witnesses here. Just the trees and the sky. But I will make my vow anyway. I choose you, Tobias Jensen. I bind my life to yours. In joy and sorrow, in plenty and want, in peace and danger, I am yours and you are mine. No clan law can break this. No human prejudice can undo it. We are married in the ways that matter, in our hearts and our choices, and our commitment to each other. In human marriages," Tobias said, "we say, I take you to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. I say those words to you now, Grasha. I take you as my wife in all the ways that matter. Before these trees and this sky, before whatever gods may watch, I pledge myself to you for all the days of my life." They stood and embraced, husband and wife now by their own declaration, if not by any law the outside world would recognize. And perhaps that was better, Tobias thought. Perhaps marriages that came from choice and love rather than from law and tradition were the truest ones of all. That winter was the happiest of Tobias's life. He and Grasha settled into their marriage with the ease of people who had already learned to live together, to share space and resources and the small intimacies of daily life. They cooked together, worked together, slept tangled in each other's arms through the long, cold nights. Grasha taught him more of her language until he could hold full conversations in Orcish, though his accent made her laugh. He taught her to read and write in common, something her clan had never prioritized, and she took to it with fierce intelligence. They read together by firelight, sharing the handful of books Tobias owned and making up stories when they ran out. "Tell me about our future," Grasha said one snowy evening, her head in his lap while he ran his fingers through her long dark hair. "What do you see for us?" "I see us here," Tobias said, "growing old together. Maybe building a bigger cabin, definitely planting more of a garden because you have convinced me that vegetables do not have to be boring. I see winters by the fire and summers by the creek. I see a life of peace. Just the two of us. No children." He had thought about it, of course. Wondered if it was even possible for orcs and humans to have children together. Wondered what such a child would face, belonging fully to neither world. "Do you want children?" "Someday, maybe," Grasha said. "I do not know if it is possible. But if it is, if we were blessed that way, I think I would want it. A child raised to know both Orcish and human traditions, to see both peoples as just people. A child who could grow up knowing love instead of hate." "That would be a good thing," Tobias agreed. "A very good thing. Though the world would not be kind to such a child. Then we would have to be kind enough to make up for it," Grasha said firmly. "We would teach them to be strong, to be proud of what they are, to never apologize for existing." "You would be an excellent mother," Tobias said, and he meant it. "And you would be a wonderful father, patient and kind and willing to admit when you are wrong," she grinned up at him. "Which is important because I am always right." "Is that so?" "Absolutely. It is an Orcish trait. We are infallible." "Strange. I seem to remember you being wrong about the proper way to stack firewood just last week." She swatted his leg. That was different. That was you being stubborn, not me being wrong. He laughed and bent to kiss her, and the conversation about children drifted into comfortable silence, a possibility to consider rather than an immediate plan. They had time, after all the time in the world, out here in their cabin where the rest of the world could not touch them. Spring came again, bringing mud and melting snow and the first green shoots of new growth. Grasha tended the garden with the devotion of someone who had spent a winter eating preserved food and craved something fresh. Tobias expanded their perimeter, setting more traps, scouting further into the forest for resources they could use. It was on one of these scouting trips that he found the injured human. The man was young, maybe 20, and he lay at the bottom of a ravine with his leg bent at a wrong angle that looked sickeningly familiar. Tobias approached cautiously, calling out so as not to startle him. "I am not going to hurt you," he said. "My name is Tobias Jensen. I live near here. Let me help you." The young man stared at him with pain-glazed eyes. "Thank God," he gasped. "I thought I would die out here. I fell yesterday. Cannot move. Leg is broken." Tobias climbed down into the ravine and assessed the injury with practiced efficiency. Clean break, much like Grasha's had been. Treatable, but the man would need help to get out of the ravine and somewhere safe to heal. He thought about Grasha, about the life they had built in secret, about the risk of bringing an outsider anywhere near their home. Then he thought about the orc girl he had helped without hesitation, and he knew he could not leave this man to die any more than he could have left her. "I am going to set your leg and then get you somewhere safe," Tobias said. "It is going to hurt. Just do it," the man gritted out. Tobias set the leg with the same care he had shown Grasha, and the man screamed but bore it. By the time Tobias had splinted the injury and fashioned a litter, the sun was high overhead, and he was calculating how to manage this situation. He could not take the man to the cabin. Not with Grasha there. But there was an old hunting shelter about a mile east, barely more than a lean-to but with a roof and walls. He could take the man there, bring him supplies, tend to him until he was well enough to make his way to the nearest settlement. It would mean days of careful juggling, of lying to both Grasha and this injured stranger, of existing in two worlds at once. But he saw no other choice. Over the next week, Tobias became a man divided. He would spend mornings at the cabin with Grasha, then make excuses to go check trap lines or gather specific herbs. Instead, he would go to the hunting shelter where the young man, whose name turned out to be Samuel, was slowly healing. Samuel was grateful and talkative, eager for company after days alone in the forest. He told Tobias about his life in a border settlement, about the girl he hoped to marry, about his dreams of buying land and starting a farm. He was kind and earnest and everything that was good about humanity, and Tobias liked him despite the complications his presence brought. But keeping the secret from Grasha gnawed at him. He hated lying to her, hated the way she looked at him with slight concern when he came home later than expected or made excuses for his absences. He could see her starting to withdraw slightly, doubt creeping into her eyes, and it killed him. On the 8th day, he came home to find Grasha sitting at the table with her arms crossed and her expression serious. "We need to talk," she said. Tobias's stomach dropped. "All right. Where have you been going?" she asked bluntly. "And do not tell me you are checking traps. I know how long that takes, and you have been gone twice as long every day this week." He could lie. He could make up some story about scouting for new territory or tracking a problem predator. But he looked at his wife, the woman he had married under the trees with vows that mattered more than any law, and he could not bring himself to add another lie to the pile. "There is an injured human," he said. "A young man named Samuel. I found him in a ravine with a broken leg. I have been caring for him in an old hunting shelter about a mile east of here." Grasha's expression flickered through several emotions too quickly for him to name. "You found an injured human and you did not tell me. I did not want to worry you. And I did not want to bring him here to our home, to the life we have built in secret. So instead you snuck around and lied to me." Her voice was rising, hurt and anger mixing. "Do you not trust me, Tobias? Did you think I would demand you leave him to die?" "No, he ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "I was trying to protect you, protect us. If he saw you, if he knew an orc was living here, he could tell others. Our secret would be out. So you were protecting our secret by keeping secrets from me." Grasha stood, her movements sharp with agitation. "That is not how this works. We are supposed to be partners, husband and wife. You do not get to make decisions about what I can and cannot know to protect me like I am some fragile thing that might break." "You are right," Tobias said immediately, because she was. "I am sorry. I should have told you right away. I should have trusted you with this." "Yes, you should have." She was quiet for a moment, visibly working to control her anger. "Take me to him." "What? The injured human?" "Samuel. Take me to him. I want to see him." "Grasha, I do not think that is a good idea." "I do not care what you think right now," she said flatly. "You have been making decisions without me all week. Now I am making one. Take me to him or I will find him myself." Tobias recognized the set of her jaw, the steel in her eyes. He nodded. "All right. But let me go first and prepare him. Seeing an orc woman appear suddenly might be shocking for someone in his condition." "Fine. I will follow in 5 minutes." Tobias made his way to the hunting shelter with his heart pounding. He found Samuel awake and looking much better than he had a week ago, color back in his face and the leg healing well. "Tobias," Samuel greeted him with a smile. "I was beginning to think you were not coming today." "Samuel, I need to tell you something and I need you to listen carefully." Tobias crouched beside him. "Someone else is about to arrive. Someone who lives with me. She is going to look different from anyone you have ever met, but I need you to understand that she is not a threat. She is my wife and she means you no harm." Samuel's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, different?" Before Tobias could answer, Grasha ducked through the shelter entrance. To her credit, she had clearly made an effort to appear less intimidating, tying her hair back and wearing her simplest clothes. But there was no disguising what she was. Her green skin and tusks marked her immediately as orc. Samuel's eyes went wide with shock and fear. He scrambled backward despite his injured leg, a gasp of pain escaping him. "Stay back," he said, his voice tight with terror. "Tobias, get away from it. That is an orc. They are dangerous." "She is my wife," Tobias said firmly, "and she is not dangerous unless you threaten her." "Samuel, this is Grasha. Grasha, this is Samuel." Samuel stared between them like they had both lost their minds. "Your wife. You married an orc." "I did," Tobias said. "A year ago. She is the reason I know how to set a broken leg so well. She had the same injury and I treated her." Grasha moved slowly, carefully, like she was approaching a spooked animal. She settled down near the entrance, far enough away to not seem threatening but close enough to be part of the conversation. "I am not going to hurt you, Samuel," she said, her voice gentle. "I understand that you are afraid. You have probably been taught your whole life that orcs are monsters, but I am just a person, a woman who married a kind man and who wants to live in peace." "This is insane," Samuel said, but Tobias could hear the fear fading slightly, replaced by confusion. "Orcs and humans cannot just marry. It is not done. It is forbidden." "By whose law?" Tobias asked. "We made our own vows before gods and trees and our own hearts. We hurt no one by our choice. We simply live here in the woods and try to be happy." Samuel was still staring at Grasha, and Tobias could see him struggling to reconcile everything he had been taught with the reality in front of him. Here was an orc woman sitting calmly, speaking kindly, not attacking or threatening despite his obvious fear. "You really married her?" Samuel asked Tobias. "I really did. Best decision I ever made." "I do not understand. How can you? I mean, she is an orc." "She is a person," Tobias corrected gently. "Just like you and me. She has hopes and fears and dreams. She laughs at terrible jokes and cooks amazing food and makes me happier than I have ever been. The fact that she has green skin and tusks does not change any of that." Grasha spoke up, her voice steady. "I know my people have done terrible things to humans, Samuel. Just as humans have done terrible things to my people. My own father was killed in a human raid. I carried anger and hate for years because of it. But Tobias showed me that it is possible to see past those old wounds, to choose a different path. I am not asking you to forget what you have been taught or to suddenly trust all orcs. I am just asking you to see me as I am, a woman who means you no harm." Samuel was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving between them. Finally, he spoke. "You saved my life," he said to Tobias. "Set my leg, brought me food and water, cared for me like I was kin. If you trust her, if you love her enough to marry her, then I suppose I have no right to question it." "You have every right to your feelings," Tobias said. "This is strange and new and goes against everything both our cultures teach, but thank you for at least trying to see past it." "Can I ask you something?" Samuel said to Grasha. "Of course. You love him, truly?" Grasha's expression softened, and she looked at Tobias with such open affection that his heart clenched. "More than I knew it was possible to love anyone," she said. "He is my husband, my partner, my best friend. He makes me want to be better, kinder, more patient. He saved my life, and then he showed me how to truly live it. So yes, Samuel, I love him truly." Something in Samuel's face shifted, the last of his fear draining away to be replaced by wonder. "I never thought I would see anything like this," he said. "An orc and a human in love. If my friends back home heard about it, they would never believe it." "Which is why you cannot tell them," Tobias said urgently. "Samuel, you must understand. If word got out about Grasha, about our life here, there would be consequences. Humans would call me a traitor. Orcs would want Grasha punished or killed for choosing a human over her clan. We can only survive if our secret stays secret." "You want me to lie?" Samuel asked. "I want you to say nothing," Tobias corrected. "When your leg heals enough for you to travel, you will make your way back to your settlement. You will tell them you were injured in a fall and that a hermit found you and helped you heal. All of that is true. You simply leave out the detail about the hermit's wife." Samuel thought about it, his young face serious. "You are asking me to keep a secret that goes against everything I have been raised to believe. I am asking you to keep a secret that protects two people who have done you no harm," Tobias said. "I am asking you to choose compassion over duty, love over law. I know that is not easy, but I also know you have a kind heart, Samuel. I have seen it this past week. I am asking you to let that kindness extend to us." Samuel looked at Grasha again, really looked at her, and Tobias saw the moment something shifted. Maybe it was the way she sat so carefully, non-threatening. Maybe it was the obvious love in her eyes when she looked at Tobias. Maybe it was simply that meeting an actual orc person made it harder to see orcs as faceless monsters. "I will keep your secret," Samuel said finally. "I do not fully understand your marriage, and I am not sure I could do what you have done, but I can see that you care for each other. And you saved my life, both of you, in different ways. I owe you that much at least." Relief flooded through Tobias so powerfully he felt dizzy with it. "Thank you," he said. "Truly, thank you. But I have one condition," Samuel added. When I tell the story of the hermit who saved me, I am going to say he and his wife helped me. I will not mention that she is an orc, but I will not erase her either. She deserves to be part of the story." Grasha smiled, and it transformed her face. "That is fair," she said. "Thank you, Samuel." Over the next 2 weeks, as Samuel's leg continued to heal, an unlikely friendship formed. Grasha visited the shelter regularly, bringing food and checking on his progress. Samuel grew comfortable around her, even making jokes at one point that made her laugh. He asked questions about orc culture, and she answered honestly, painting a picture of her people that was complex and human in ways Samuel had never considered. In turn, Samuel told them about life in the settlements, about the politics and prejudices that shaped human-orc relations. He shared news from the wider world that Tobias and Grasha had been isolated from. Some of it was troubling, tales of new skirmishes and old hatreds flaring up. But some of it was hopeful, small stories of orcs and humans finding ways to coexist in certain regions. "The world is changing," Samuel said one afternoon. "Slowly, maybe, but changing. There are people on both sides who are tired of the fighting, who want something different. You too, what you have built here, it is proof that different is possible." "We are just 2 people trying to live quietly," Tobias said. "Maybe. But sometimes the quiet things are the revolutionary ones." Samuel looked between them. "You should know, I think what you are doing is brave, braver than fighting in a war. It takes real courage to love someone the world tells you is your enemy." The day came when Samuel's leg had healed enough for him to travel. Tobias helped him back to the main path that would lead him to the nearest settlement, Grasha staying behind at the cabin to preserve the illusion of her absence. "I will not forget this," Samuel said, gripping Tobias's hand. "Any of it. The help you gave me, the kindness you both showed. The lesson that things do not have to be the way they have always been." "Be safe," Tobias said. "Live well. Marry your girl and build your farm. Be happy, Samuel. I will try, and you do the same. You and Grasha, you deserve all the happiness you can find." They parted ways at the forest edge, Samuel heading toward civilization, and Tobias turning back toward the woods and the cabin, and the woman who waited there. He found Grasha standing by their carved tree, her fingers tracing the letters of their vows. "You think he will really keep our secret?" she asked when Tobias came to stand beside her. "I do," Tobias said. "He is a good man. He understands what is at stake. It is strange, is it not? We spent so long hiding from everyone, building our life in secret, and then Samuel stumbled into it, and now he knows. It makes me realize how fragile this all is, how easily it could all come crashing down. But it has not," Tobias pointed out. "Samuel knows, and he is keeping our secret. Maybe that is reason for hope rather than fear." "Maybe," Grasha agreed. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her. "Sometimes I wonder what would happen if we stopped hiding, if we just told the world about us and dared them to tear us apart." "They would tear us apart," Tobias said bluntly. "You know they would. Neither of our peoples is ready for what we represent. I know, but I still wonder." She turned in his arms to face him. "Do you ever regret it, choosing this life, choosing me?" "Never," he said immediately, fiercely. "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grasha. You and this life we have built. I would choose you again in every lifetime, in every possible world." She kissed him then, deep and long, and when they pulled apart her eyes were wet with tears. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes, because I know how much I have to lose." "Then we will be careful," Tobias said. "We will protect this life and each other. We will survive because we have to, because the alternative is unthinkable. And we will be happy, Grasha. Despite everything, we will be happy." Summer flowed into autumn, and the year deadline Grasha's uncle had given her approached like an oncoming storm. They did not speak of it often, but it hung between them, an unspoken question that demanded an answer. One evening, as they sat by the fire watching leaves fall past the window, Grasha finally addressed it. "The year is almost up," she said quietly. "Soon Throck will return to see if I am coming home. And what will you tell him? That I am not coming. That I have made my choice and I am staying here." She looked at Tobias. "But I want to say goodbye properly, not just send them away when they arrive. I want to bring you to meet them, show them who I have chosen to spend my life with. Grasha, that is incredibly dangerous. If they realize we are married, I know the risks. But I am tired of hiding, tired of feeling ashamed of the best thing in my life. They are my family, Tobias. Even if I am choosing to leave them, I want them to understand why. I want them to see that I am happy." Tobias understood the desire, had felt the same pull himself toward honesty and openness. But the practical part of him, the part that had kept them safe all this time, screamed warnings. "What if they react with violence?" he asked. "What if they try to kill me or drag you away by force?" "Then I will fight them," Grasha said simply. "I will make it clear that you are under my protection, that harming you means going through me. They are my family, but you are my husband. You come first now." They planned carefully. When Throck and his hunters arrived, as they did on a cool autumn morning exactly 1 year after Grasha's original injury, they found her waiting in the clearing by the carved tree. Tobias stood beside her, unarmed but resolute. The 3 orc hunters stopped short at the sight of the human, hands going to weapons. Throck, a massive orc with graying hair and scars that spoke of decades of war, stepped forward with eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Grasha," he said in the orcish tongue, "who is this human?" "This is Tobias Jensen," Grasha replied, also in orcish. Tobias understood most of it, his grasp of the language much improved. "He is the one who found me when I fell, who set my broken leg and saved my life." "And why is he still here?" Throck demanded. "You said you were living alone." "I lied," Grasha said calmly. "I have been living with Tobias. He is my husband." The words fell like stones into water, sending out ripples of shock. The other 2 hunters drew weapons immediately, but Throck held up a hand to stop them. "Your husband," he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "You married a human." "I did. 1 year ago, by our own vows, we bound our lives together. I love him, uncle. He makes me happy in ways I never thought possible, and I am not coming back to the clan." Throck's face darkened with anger and something that might have been pain. "Your mother grieves for you every day," he said. "Your family needs you, the clan needs you, and you choose this human over your own people." "I am not choosing him over my people," Grasha said, though her voice shook slightly. "I am choosing a life of peace over a life of war. I am choosing happiness over endless anger. I am choosing to build something new instead of clinging to old hatreds. I am sorry that hurts you and Mother and the clan, but I cannot go back. Not now. Not after I know what it feels like to live without that constant weight of rage." Tobias spoke then, his orcish accented but clear. "I know I am your enemy by birth," he said. "I know my people have done terrible things to yours. I cannot undo that history. But I swear to you I love Grasha with everything I am. I will protect her, provide for her, honor her for all my days. I will never hurt her or betray her. This I vow before you and before any gods that watch." Throck studied him with eyes that missed nothing. "You speak our language," he said, surprised. "Grasha taught me. She has taught me many things, how to see orcs as people, not enemies. How to let go of old hatreds, how to choose love over fear." "Pretty words from a human," one of the other hunters spat. "Words mean nothing." "You are right," Tobias agreed. Words are cheap, but actions matter. I saved Grasha's life when I could have left her to die. I have cared for her, built a life with her, married her despite knowing the world would condemn us both for it. I am here now, unarmed, facing 3 orc warriors because Grasha wanted to say goodbye properly. If my actions do not speak to my intentions, then nothing I say will convince you. Throck was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving between Grasha and Tobias. Finally, he spoke to Grasha. You truly love him. This is not some enchantment or trick. I truly love him, Grasha said. More than I can express. He is my husband, my partner, my home. Then you are making a foolish choice, Throck said heavily. But I suppose it is yours to make. The clan will consider you dead, Grasha. Your name will not be spoken. Your mother will mourn you as if you died the day you fell from that tree. Is this human worth that price? Grasha's hand found Tobias's and gripped tight. He is, she said. I am sorry, uncle. Tell mother I love her. Tell her I am happy. Tell her that sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to choose life. Throck nodded slowly. He looked at Tobias and said in heavily accented common, If you hurt her, human, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Understood, Tobias said, but I will not hurt her. See that you do not. Throck turned to leave, then paused. For what it is worth, she does look happy. Happier than I have seen her since her father died. I suppose that counts for something. The 3 hunters left, disappearing into the forest. Grasha stood watching them go, tears streaming down her face, and Tobias held her while she grieved for the family she had just lost. I am sorry, he whispered. I am so sorry. Do not be, she said through her tears. This was my choice. I made it knowing the cost, but that does not mean it does not hurt. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the autumn cold. When Grasha finally pulled away, her eyes were red but resolute. I need to be alone for a while, she said. Just to process this, to grieve properly. I am going to walk in the woods. I will be back before dark. All right, Tobias said, though it killed him to let her go. I love you. I love you too. That is why I chose this. Remember that. He watched her walk into the trees, her figure growing smaller until the forest swallowed her completely. Then he went into the cabin and sat by the fire and prayed to any gods that might be listening that they would weather this grief together. Grasha returned as the sun set, her eyes still red, but her composure regained. She came to Tobias and kissed him with desperate intensity, and they made love with a fierce urgency that spoke of grief and relief and the need to reaffirm their choice. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed, Grasha spoke into the darkness. I do not regret it, she said. Choosing you. Losing my family, I would make the same choice again. I know, Tobias said, stroking her hair, but you are still allowed to grieve what you lost. I will grieve. But I will also celebrate what I gained. You, this life, the peace I feel for the first time in years, that is worth the price. They healed together from that day, the wound of Grasha's severed family ties slowly scabbing over. It would always ache, Tobias knew, but they would bear it together. That was what marriage meant, bearing the hurts together and finding joy in spite of them. Winter came again, and spring after it, and summer, and autumn. The years began to blur together in the best possible way, each season bringing its own rhythms and pleasures. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room that Grasha filled with her herb-drying racks and cooking experiments. They built a proper root cellar and a smokehouse. They cleared more land for the garden and planted fruit trees that would take years to mature, but represented faith in a shared future. On their 3rd anniversary, Tobias came home from checking traps to find Grasha sitting at the table with a strange expression on her face. She looked up when he entered, and he saw tears in her eyes. What is wrong? He asked immediately, crossing to her. Are you hurt? What happened? "I am pregnant," she said, and her voice shook. "Tobias, I am pregnant. I was not even sure it was possible for orcs and humans to conceive together, but I am definitely pregnant." Tobias felt the world tilt sideways. A baby. They were going to have a baby. The impossibility of it, the sheer miraculous wonder, overwhelmed him completely. "Are you certain?" he asked, even though he could see the certainty in her eyes. "I am certain. I know the signs. Tobias, we are going to be parents." He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, and he felt tears on his own cheeks now. "I love you," he said. "I love you, and I love this child we made. I am terrified and thrilled in equal measure." "So am I," Grasha admitted. "This child will have such a hard path. Neither fully orc nor fully human. The world will not know what to make of them." "Then we will teach them to make their own path," Tobias said firmly. "We will raise them to be strong and kind and proud of what they are. We will teach them both languages, both cultures, the best of both peoples. And we will love them so fiercely that the world's prejudices cannot touch them." "Promise?" Grasha asked, her voice small and vulnerable in a way it rarely was. "I promise," he said. "We will give this child everything we can. Love and safety and the knowledge that they are wanted and cherished. And when they are old enough to understand, we will tell them the story of how their parents fell in love despite the world saying it was impossible. We will teach them that the best things in life are often the hardest one." Grasha's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Her body changed in fascinating ways, her belly swelling with their child, and Tobias found himself constantly amazed by the miracle of it. He read every book on childbirth he owned, wished desperately for a midwife, but knowing they could trust no one with their secret. Grasha remained strong and healthy, her orcish constitution serving her well. They prepared together, building a cradle from polished wood, sewing tiny clothes, stockpiling supplies. They argued cheerfully about names, Grasha insisting on an orcish name and Tobias wanting something that worked in both languages. They settled eventually on choices they both loved, ready for either a boy or girl. The labor came on a warm spring morning, earlier than expected but not dangerously so. Grasha was magnificent in her strength, laboring for hours with Tobias beside her, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. When their daughter finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Tobias cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped her in soft cloth while Grasha caught her breath. "Let me see her," Grasha said, her voice exhausted but eager. Tobias placed their daughter in her arms and watched his wife's face transform with love. The baby was perfect, a strange and beautiful blend of both her parents. Her skin was a pale green, lighter than Grasha's but definitely not human. She had tiny tusks already visible in her mouth. Her ears were pointed but smaller than a full orc's. Her eyes, when they opened, were dark and wise. "Hello, little one," Grasha murmured. "Welcome to the world. I am your mother and this is your father, and we love you more than all the stars in the sky." "She is perfect," Tobias said, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect. What should we call her?" They had agreed on the name weeks ago, but saying it aloud made it real. "Mira," Grasha said. "It means beloved in Orcish and peace in the old human tongue. Mira Jensen." "Mira," Tobias repeated, testing the name. Their daughter gurgled as if in approval, and they both laughed through their tears. The first months of Mira's life were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. She was a healthy baby, strong and alert, with her mother's fierce determination already evident in the way she attacked her feedings. Tobias and Grasha took turns walking her when she cried, sang to her in 2 languages, marveled at every tiny change and development. Tobias learned that love could expand infinitely. That loving Mira did not diminish what he felt for Grasha, but rather seemed to multiply it. Watching his wife with their daughter, seeing the gentleness and fierce protection in every touch, made him fall in love with Grasha all over again in new and deeper ways. They had been lucky so far, isolated enough that no one stumbled upon them by accident. But with a baby who cried and made noise, they knew they had to be even more careful. They took turns keeping watch, especially in the early months when Mira's cries carried far on still nights. Mira grew quickly, reaching milestones early thanks to her orcish heritage. She sat up at 3 months, crawled at 5, took her first steps at 8 months. She said her first words in both orcish and common, calling for mama and papa with equal ease. Her laughter was the most beautiful sound either parent had ever heard. On Mira's first birthday, they had a small celebration, just the 3 of them. Grasha made a special cake with honey frosting, and they sang to their daughter in both languages while she clapped her pudgy hands and laughed. Tobias carved her a small wooden horse, and Grasha sewed her a new dress in orc style but sized for a toddler. That night, after Mira was asleep in her cradle, Tobias and Grasha sat by the fire and reflected on the year that had passed. "She's going to ask questions soon," Grasha said. "About why she looks different from both of us, about why we live alone, about why she has never met another person. I know, and we will answer her honestly in ways she can understand. We will teach her that being different is not bad, it is just different. That she is special and loved, and that is what matters." Tobias took Grasha's hand. "We will also need to decide what happens when she gets older. She cannot live her whole life isolated in these woods. She will need more than just us." "I have been thinking about that," Grasha said. "There are stories in orcish lore, tales of mixed-blood children who became great leaders because they could move between both worlds. Maybe Mira could be that. Maybe by the time she is old enough, the world will have changed enough to accept her. And if it has not, then we will have raised her strong enough to change it herself," Grasha said with quiet conviction. The years passed in that cabin in the woods, each one marked by Mira's growth and development. She became a bright, curious child, full of questions and laughter. She learned to read in both languages by the time she was 4, learned to cook alongside her mother, learned to track and hunt with her father. She knew the forest like the back of her hand, could name every plant and animal, could move through the trees with the silence of an orc and the patience of a human. She asked about why they lived alone, and they told her the truth in age-appropriate ways. That sometimes people did not understand when orcs and humans loved each other. That they lived quietly to avoid trouble, but that did not mean they were doing anything wrong. That she was a beautiful blend of both peoples, and that was something to be proud of, even if others might not see it that way yet. Mira absorbed it all with the resilience of childhood, accepting her unique situation with grace. She never seemed to resent their isolation, finding joy in the life they had built together. She was happy, and that was what mattered most to Tobias and Grasha. When Mira was 5, Samuel returned. They heard him calling from the edge of the forest, announcing himself so as not to startle them. Tobias went out to meet him, finding the young man now grown into full adulthood, married himself if the ring on his finger was any indication. "Samuel," Tobias greeted him warmly. "It has been years. What brings you back to these woods?" "I wanted to see you," Samuel said. "To see if you were still here, still happy, and to bring you news from the settlements." They walked to the cabin together, and Tobias called out a warning before they entered so Grasha would not be startled. She emerged with Mira on her hip, and Samuel's eyes went wide at the sight of the child. "Is this," he started. "Our daughter, Mira," Grasha said with obvious pride. "Mira, this is our friend Samuel. He is a very special person because he knows our secret and keeps it safe." Mira studied Samuel with her dark, solemn eyes. "You are the first other person I have ever met," she said in perfect common. Samuel looked like he might cry. "She is beautiful," he said. "Both of yours. I never thought I did not know it was possible." "Neither did we," Tobias admitted. "But here she is, our miracle." They spent the afternoon together, Samuel sharing news from the outside world. There were changes happening, he told them. Slow changes, but changes nonetheless. Some border towns were establishing trade agreements with orc settlements. There were talks of peace treaties in certain regions. The old hatreds were still strong, but cracks were forming in them. "I think about you too often," Samuel said. "About what you have built here. You are proof that it is possible, you know. That orcs and humans can not just coexist but love each other, build families together." "I have told a version of your story, carefully, to people I trust. Never with names or locations, but the idea of it. You would be surprised how many people are hungry for something different, something hopeful." "That is dangerous," Grasha said. "If the wrong people hear and start looking, I am careful," Samuel assured her. "I only speak of it to those who already question the old ways. But I wanted you to know that what you are doing matters. Not just for yourselves, but for everyone who dreams of a different future." Before he left, Samuel gave them a gift, a small bag of coins and a letter of credit from a trader he trusted absolutely. "In case you ever need supplies and cannot come yourself," he explained. "This man knows my story, knows I have friends I protect. He will ask no questions if you use this." It was a lifeline they had not expected, and both Tobias and Grasha were moved by the gesture. They watched Samuel disappear back into the forest, and Mira waved enthusiastically until he was out of sight. "I liked him," Mira announced. "Can we have more visitors?" "Someday," Grasha said, exchanging a look with Tobias. "When it is safe. When the world is ready." But Samuel's visit planted a seed in both their minds. Maybe isolation was not the only answer. Maybe there were others out there like Samuel, people who would accept them, who could be trusted. Maybe the world was changing faster than they realized. They began making careful, exploratory trips to the nearest settlements, using Samuel's letter of credit. They never went together, always leaving one parent with Mira for safety. But they met Samuel's trader friend, a grizzled old man who asked no questions and traded fairly. They heard more stories of changing attitudes, of young people especially who questioned the old hatreds. When Mira was 7, they made a radical decision. They would slowly, carefully, begin to introduce her to the wider world. Not by revealing her existence to everyone, but by making strategic contact with trusted individuals, people like Samuel who had proven their discretion and goodwill. It started with the trader, who met Mira on one of their supply runs and showed no fear or disgust, only wonder and kindness. Then Samuel's wife, who cried when she met Mira and called her a miracle. Slowly, carefully, they built a small network of people who knew their secret and guarded it fiercely. Mira flourished with these limited contacts. She learned that not all humans feared orcs, that not all orcs hated humans. She learned that the world was more complex than any simple division of peoples, that individuals mattered more than their race. By the time Mira was 10, the world had changed enough that they felt safe making their existence slightly less secret. They did not announce it widely, but they stopped hiding quite so carefully. A few more people met Mira each year, and each one was won over by her brightness and charm. Word spread in certain circles of the orc-human family living in the woods, and while some still condemned them, others began to point to them as proof that peace was possible. Tobias and Grasha watched their daughter grow into a confident, compassionate young woman, and they knew they had succeeded in their most important task. They had raised a child who knew love instead of hate, who saw the best in people instead of assuming the worst, who carried herself with pride in her unique heritage. On Mira's 13th birthday, Grasha took her daughter aside for a serious conversation. "You are old enough now to understand something important," Grasha said. "You are not just our daughter. You are living proof that orcs and humans can come together in love. You represent a future that many people dream of but few dare to believe in. That is a heavy burden for such young shoulders, but it is also an incredible gift." "What do you want me to do with it?" Mira asked. "Whatever you choose," Grasha said. "You could stay here with us, hidden in safety. You could go out into the world and try to bridge the divide between our peoples. You could do something entirely different that we have not even imagined. The point is, the choice is yours. Your father and I made our choices, built our life. Now you get to decide what kind of life you want to build." "Can I think about it?" Mira asked. "You can take all the time you need," Grasha assured her. But they could already see the wheels turning in their daughter's mind, could see her beginning to grasp the larger implications of her existence. Tobias knew they had raised someone special, someone who might actually change the world someday. The thought filled him with pride and terror in equal measure. The test came when Mira was 15. A group of young people from a nearby settlement, all around Mira's age, ventured into the woods and stumbled upon the cabin. Among them was Samuel's son, who had heard stories of the miracle family and wanted to see for himself. Tobias and Grasha had moments to decide how to handle it before the young people knocked on their door. They looked at each other, looked at Mira standing tall and unafraid, and they made their choice. "Answer the door," Tobias said to Mira. "Show them who you are. Let them decide how to react." Mira opened the door to reveal 5 young humans, all of whom stared at her with various degrees of shock and wonder. She smiled at them, that warm smile she had inherited from her mother. "Hello," she said in perfect common. "My name is Mira Jensen. Would you like to come in for tea?" It was such a normal, polite invitation that it broke the tension immediately. The young people laughed nervously and accepted, filing into the cabin with wide eyes. They met Tobias and Grasha, absorbed the reality of an orc-human family, and by the time they left several hours later, every one of them was convinced that the old hatreds were foolish and outdated. Word spread after that, more quickly than Tobias would have liked, but in mostly positive ways. Young people especially seemed fascinated by Mira, by the family that should not exist, but did. They came to the cabin in increasing numbers, always respectful, always curious, and Tobias and Grasha found themselves becoming inadvertent ambassadors for a new way of thinking. There were still those who disapproved, of course. They received threats occasionally, found signs of trespassers who clearly meant harm. But they also found defenders, people who stood up for them, who argued passionately that love transcended race, and that Mira was proof of that. On Mira's 18th birthday, she made her announcement. She wanted to travel, to visit both human and orc settlements, to share her story and try to build bridges between the two peoples. "I know it is dangerous," she said, sitting with her parents by the fire. "I know there are those who would hurt me for what I represent. But I also know that there are people out there hungry for change, desperate for proof that peace is possible. I want to be that proof. I want to honor what you and Mother built by taking it further, by showing the world that your love created something beautiful and strong." Tobias felt his heart swell with pride and break with fear simultaneously. "You are so brave," he said. "Braver than I ever was." "But Mira, the world can be cruel. I do not want to see you hurt." "Then you taught me well," Mira said with a smile. You taught me to be strong, to stand up for what I believe in, to choose love over fear. Now I am going to take those lessons and use them. Trust me, Father. Trust that you and Mother raised me well enough to handle this." Grasha spoke then, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "We trust you," she said. "We have always trusted you. You are our greatest achievement, Mira, not just because you exist, but because of who you have become. If this is your choice, if this is your path, then we support you completely." They spent the next months preparing Mira for her journey. Samuel, now a respected elder in his community, offered to introduce her to key people in various settlements. The trader provided letters of introduction to his contacts. Other friends they had made over the years offered advice, warnings, and blessings. The day Mira left was one of the hardest of Tobias's life. He hugged his daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "Come back to us," he whispered. "No matter what happens out there, know that you always have a home here. Always." "I will," Mira promised. "I am not saying goodbye forever. Just goodbye for now. I need to do this, Father. I need to see if I can make a difference." "I know you will," he said. "I have never doubted that for a moment." He watched her walk into the forest, his daughter the bridge builder, the living symbol of hope. Grasha stood beside him, and they held hands as Mira disappeared from view. "We did well," Grasha said softly. "She is going to change the world." "I know," Tobias said. "I am terrified and proud in equal measure." "That is what parenthood is," Grasha said with a watery laugh. "Terror and pride all the time." They went back into their cabin, quieter now without Mira's presence, and they held each other and trusted that their daughter would be safe, would be strong, would be everything they had raised her to be. The months passed slowly. Mira sent letters when she could, telling of her travels, the people she met, the reactions she received. Some communities welcomed her warmly. Others were hostile, and she had to leave quickly for her safety. But she persisted, driven by her mission, and slowly she began to make a difference. She met other mixed-blood children, rare but not as impossible as everyone had thought. She helped facilitate the first official peace talks between a human settlement and an orc clan in over a generation. She told the story of her parents again and again, and people listened. 2 years after Mira left, she returned home for a visit, bringing with her a young man who looked at her the way Tobias looked at Grasha. He was human, kind-eyed and gentle, and completely in love with their daughter. Tobias and Grasha welcomed him warmly, seeing in this young couple an echo of their own beginning. "His name is Thomas," Mira said, her hand clasped in his. "Thomas Jennings. He is a builder, helps construct meeting houses for peace negotiations. We met at a gathering 6 months ago, and we have been traveling together since." "Your daughter is the bravest person I have ever met," Thomas said earnestly. "She walks into hostile situations and somehow makes people see reason. She is changing minds everywhere she goes." They stayed for 2 weeks, and Tobias loved seeing Mira happy, seeing her confident in her mission and in her choice of partner. When they left again, he felt more at peace than he had since she first departed. More years passed. The world did change, slowly but measurably. Peace treaties were signed. Trade agreements established. Mixed communities began to form in certain regions, places where orcs and humans lived side by side with gradually easing tensions. It was not perfect, would never be perfect, but it was progress. Tobias and Grasha grew old together in their cabin in the woods. Their hair grayed, their bodies slowed, but their love remained constant and strong. They had built something lasting, not just in their marriage but in the daughter they had raised and the change she was helping to create in the world. On their 30th anniversary, Mira came home with news. She and Thomas had married in a ceremony that included both human and orc traditions. and she was pregnant with their first child, a grandchild who would carry Tobias and Grasha's legacy forward into another generation. "We want to name the baby after you," Mira said. "If it is a boy, Tobias. If it is a girl, Grasha." Tobias felt tears spill down his weathered cheeks. "That would honor us greatly," he said. The grandchild, when she arrived 6 months later, was named Grasha, and she was perfect. Tobias held his granddaughter in his arms and marveled at the path his life had taken. From a bitter war veteran isolated in the woods to a husband, father, grandfather, and inadvertent architect of social change. None of it would have happened without that moment 30 years ago when he found an injured orc girl in the forest and made the choice to help instead of harm. "Do you ever regret it?" Grasha asked him one evening as they sat watching the sunset from their porch, now old and gray but still deeply in love. "The life you gave up for this, the acceptance you could have had from your own people." "Never," Tobias said immediately. "Not once. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life we built, the family we created, the change we helped spark, all of it is worth more than any acceptance I gave up. I would choose this again, Grasha. Every single time." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sun paint the sky in colors of fire. Behind them in the cabin, they could hear Mira singing to baby Grasha in Orcish, the same lullaby her mother had sung to her. The sound was peaceful and perfect, a promise of continuity and hope. "I love you," Grasha said softly. "I loved you when you set my broken leg and did not let me scream alone. I loved you when you asked me to stay. I loved you when we married under the trees. I love you now with 3 decades of shared life between us. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Tobias replied. "My fierce, beautiful wife, my partner in building the impossible. You made my life worth living. You gave me purpose and joy and a family I never dreamed I could have. You are everything, Grasha. Everything that matters." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge. Around them, the forest settled into its evening rhythms. Inside the cabin, their daughter sang to their granddaughter, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The story of Tobias Jensen and Grasha of Stonefist became legend in the years that followed. The human and the orc who chose love over hate, who built a family in defiance of the world's expectations, whose daughter became a symbol of hope and change. Their cabin in the woods became a pilgrimage site for those who believed in peace, a place where people came to see proof that different peoples could coexist, could love, could build something beautiful together. Tobias and Grasha lived to see their granddaughter grow, to see the world transform in ways they had barely dared to hope for. They died within months of each other, old and content, surrounded by the family they had created and the legacy they had built. And their story lived on, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to love someone the world says you should hate, and to build a life together in defiance of that hatred. The carved tree still stands in that forest, their vows preserved in its ancient bark. And those who find it stop and read and remember that love, in the end, is always stronger than fear.